Hello Year 8 and welcome to lesson 3 of Holes. As you can see on the screen, we are going to look at character introduction today of Mr. Sir. So just a few reminders of this lesson and how to get the best out of it. Make sure you're working in a quiet place, make sure you've got your equipment, your exercise book, your pencil case, and make sure you've checked Teams for the instructions from your teacher, and make sure, most importantly, that you are working hard and doing the best that you can. Okay, so title and date for today, nice and neat, underlined in your book, character introduction, Mr. Sir, and today's date. Pause the video if you need to do that now. And just a recap question, you don't need to write this down. I just want you to think from last lesson we looked at Stanley and we're going to look at a different character today. So how does a writer introduce a character in a novel? What was it that we looked at with Stanley? What were the things that we tried to find that a writer told us about a character to help introduce them to the reader? So here's a little picture of what Mr. Sir might look like. And I want you to think about his name. Told you what he's called, first of all. He's called Mr. Sir. That's a very unusual name for a character in a book. So, first of all, what might Mr. Sir tell us about him before we even meet him? I'm not going to put any answers up on the screen. I just want you to think about it. If you had a teacher at school called Mr. Sir and he said, "Hello, Year 8, I'm your new English teacher. You can call me Mr. Sir." What might be going through your head? What sort of teacher might you think they're going to be? We might be thinking, "Ooh, he sounds really friendly." Not sure I would. Mr. Sir. What kind of a name is that for a character? Just have a think about that. Pause the video if you just need to have a little wonder about it. Okay. So, how does a writer introduce a character in a novel? What did we look at for Stanley? We looked at appearance, including possessions. So things that they have on them that help bring their character to life. We look at their personality. We look at things that they say and things that they do. Any history that the writer gives us about their life, and then we make predictions about what will happen to them. So we're going to look at chapter 4 and we're going to look at Mr. Sir. Okay, so here's chapter 4. Let's read it and let's see what we find out about Mr. Sir. Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuffs and led him off the bus. He'd been on the bus for over 8 hours. "Be careful," the bus driver said as Stanley walked down the steps. Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful going down the steps or if he was telling him to be careful at Camp Green Lake. "Thanks for the ride," he said. His mouth was as dry and his throat hurt. He stepped onto the hard, dry dirt. There was a band of sweat around his wrist where the handcuff had been. The land was barren and desolate. He could see a few run-down buildings and some tents. Farther away there was a cabin beneath 2 tall trees. Those 2 trees were the only plant life he could see. There weren't even weeds. The guard led Stanley to a small building. A sign on front said, "You are entering Camp Green Lake Juvenile Correctional Facility." Next to it was another sign which declared that it was a violation of the Texas Penal Code to bring guns, explosive, weapons, drugs or alcohol onto the premises. As Stanley read the sign, he couldn't help but think, well, duh. The guard led Stanley into the building, where he felt the welcome relief of air conditioning. A man was sitting with his feet up on a desk. He turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited while the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. "It's a lot of sunflower seeds," the bus guard said. Stanley noticed a burlap sack filled with sunflower seeds on the floor next to the desk. quit smoking last month," said the man in the cowboy hat. He had a tattoo of rattlesnake on his arm, and as he signed his name, the snake's rattle seemed to wiggle. "I used to smoke a pack a day. Now I eat a sack of these every week." The guard laughed. There must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk, because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. For a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard and said the other was for the driver. 9 hours here, and now 9 hours back," the guard grumbled. "What a day." Stanley thought about the long, miserable bus ride and felt a little sorry for the guard and the bus driver. The man in the cowboy hat had spit sunflower seed shells into a waste paper basket. Then he walked around the desk to Stanley. "My name is Mr. Sir," he said. "Whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear?" Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir," he said, though he couldn't imagine that was really the man's name. "You're not in the Girl Scouts anymore," Mr. Sir said. Stanley had to remove his clothes in front of Mr. Sir, who made sure he wasn't hiding anything. He was then given 2 sets of clothes and a towel. Each set consisted of a long-sleeve orange jumpsuit, an orange t-shirt and yellow socks. Stanley wasn't sure if the socks had been yellow originally. He was also given white sneakers, an orange cap, and a canteen made of heavy plastic, which unfortunately was empty. The cap had a piece of cloth sewn on the back of it for neck protection. Stanley got dressed. The clothes smelled like soap. Mr. Sir told him he should wear 1 set to work in and 1 set for relaxation. Laundry was done every 3 days. On that day, his work clothes would be washed, then the other set would become his work clothes, and he would get clean clothes to wear while resting. "You are to dig 1 hole each day, including Saturdays and Sundays. Each hole must be 5 feet deep and 5 feet across in every direction. Your shovel is your measuring stick. Breakfast is served at 4:30. Stanley must have looked surprised, because Mr. Sir went on to explain that they started early to avoid the hottest part of the day. "No one is going to babysit you," he added. "The longer it takes you to dig, the longer you will be out in the sun. If you dig anything interesting, you are to report it to me or any other counsellor. When you finish, the rest of the day is yours." Stanley nodded to show he understood. "This isn't a Girl Scout camp," said Mr. Sir. He checked Stanley's backpack and allowed him to keep it. Then he led Stanley outside into the blazing heat. "Take a look around you," Mr. Sir said. "What do you see?" Stanley looked out across a vast wasteland. The air seemed thick with heat and dirt. "Not much," he said, then hastily added, "Mr. Sir." Mr. Sir laughed. "You see any guard towers?" "No." "How about an electric fence?" "No, Mr. Sir." "There's no fence at all, is there?" "No, Mr. Sir." "You want to run away?" Mr. Sir asked him. Stanley looked back at him, unsure what he meant. "If you want to run away, go ahead, start running. I'm not going to stop you." Stanley didn't know what kind of game Mr. Sir was playing. "I see you looking at my gun. Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you." He tapped his holster. "This is for yellow-spotted lizards. I wouldn't waste a bullet on you." "I'm not going to run away," Stanley said. "Good thinking," said Mr. Sir. "Nobody runs away from here. We don't need a fence. Know why? Because we've got the only water for 100 miles. You want to run away? You'll be buzzard food in 3 days." Stanley could see some kids dressed in orange and carrying shovels dragging themselves towards a tent. "Are you thirsty?" asked Mr. Sir. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said gratefully. "Well, you'd better get used to it. You're going to be thirsty for the next 18 months. So I want you to think of the first thing we are told about Mr. Sir when he's first introduced in the novel. Here's a little first paragraph. The man was sitting with his feet upon the desk. He turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. And even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. So what impression is the writer giving us of Mr. Sir here? What I want you to do, Year 8, is just pause the video and see if you can take out some little short quotations from this paragraph that the writer is trying to get you to think of an impression about Mr. Sir. What are the little clues he's giving you about what sort of man Mr. Sir is? Okay, so just pause the video and see if you can find them. Okay, my answers are coming up in 3, 2, 1. He's got his feet up on the desk. If I walked into a classroom and saw you with your feet up on the desk, would I have a very good first impression? No, I would not. He didn't move when Stanley walked in the room. Didn't get up, didn't turn around, he just kind of moved his head like that. Not very nice. He's inside and he's got sunglasses and a cowboy hat on. I don't know about you, but people who wear sunglasses inside kind of irritate me. Why do you need sunglasses on? It's not sunny. And a hat. It's not raining. Don't need to shade yourself from the hat, from the sun rather. And he's also, it's not the fact that he's drinking soda, but it's a fact that clearly Stanley is going to be very thirsty from that 8-hour bus ride and he's got a can of soda. Mr. Sir is going to be very aware of the situation that Stanley is in. Okay, so can we have a think then of just a few ideas, just some bullet points we can write down about in that first paragraph, what impression that makes us think about Mr. Sir. What does it make us think about him? So pause the video and see if you can just write down in your own words what it makes us think about him. Just bullet points, just notes. It's not a P paragraph or anything like that. Okay, so my answers coming up. 3, 2, 1. Well, I might think he's lazy and rude. Feet up on the desk. Not very nice, not very good first impression. Might make us think is Stanley's guilty. He's running this camp for boys who've committed a crime and he's not been very nice to him. So is he judging Stanley before he's even met him? And if he's not even looking at him, if he's got these sunglasses on, he's not taking them off, he's not making eye contact with him, he doesn't want to get to know Stanley, does he? He doesn't really want to know him. So you can get any of these down, you can add them to yours, and don't worry if you've got different ones to mine as well, that's quite alright. Okay? And also, if he's holding that can of soda, he doesn't care about Stanley, does he? He doesn't care about how Stanley will feel when he sees him drinking that soda when he's got off the bus after his 8-hour bus ride. Okay? So well done if you got some ideas that are similar to mine. Don't worry if you didn't. You can add those to yours because you will need them later on. So, what's coming up next? Well, the next thing that we are told about Stanley. What's the next thing that the writer does to introduce his character? Tells us this information. It tells us that he quit smoking. Tells us he's got a tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm, and instead of smoking he now eats these sunflower seeds. And then the last thing, there must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk because he produces 2 cans of soda. For a second Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard and said the other was for the driver. Okay, so I want you to just pause the video and I want to see if you can pull out some short quotations that the writer is trying to do to develop our impression of Mr. Sir. So pause the video and do that now, Year 8. Okay, what did I find? My answers are coming up in 3, 2, 1. Tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm. I don't know many people who've got a tattoo of a rattlesnake. My husband's got a tattoo on his arm, but it's not a rattlesnake. What sort of impression does that make us think? Well, we'll have a think about that in a minute. Now, he used to smoke, but now he eats a sack of sunflower seeds. I feed my birds sunflower seeds. They eat a lot. They don't eat a sack of them. A sack of sunflower seeds every week, that's a lot. Why does he need to do that when he's given up smoking? And then He didn't give Stanley a can of soda, he gave one to the guard and one to the driver. So what does that do to our impression of Mr. Sir? Well, tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm, tough image, likes to look a bit mean, could be angry or irritable. If he's having to eat those sunflower seeds all the time, he's having to do something to replace his smoking. It's a habit and he's having to do that because not smoking irritates him. So it's another thing he's having to do to squash his bad habit. So it might make him cross or angry because he wants to smoke but he's not smoking. Doesn't tell us why he's giving up smoking. And then he's not sympathetic at all to Stanley. He doesn't feel sorry for Stanley at all because he's not giving him the can of soda. He's not very nice to Stanley at all. Okay, so well done if you got anything similar to mine or anything near to mine. Don't worry if you didn't. You can add mine to your ideas. Okay, one more to go. So the last bit of information we're told about Mr. Sir in chapter 4 is coming up. The final things. You thirsty? asked Mr. Sir. Yes, Mr. Sir, Stanley said gratefully. Well, you better get used to it. You're going to be thirsty for the next 18 months. Not a very long bit I've picked out. What is it in there that develops our impression of Mr. Sir? How has he been in that little bit of conversation? We had actions and words in our bullet points of what a writer does to introduce a character. You better get used to it. How does he speak to him? It's not very nice, is it? He's not willing to help Stanley at all. It's not going to make anything easier for him. He's very keen for Stanley to understand he is here to be punished. It's not a Girl Scout camp. He kept repeating that line, didn't he, all the time in the chapter. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now, Year 7, is I'd like you to just try and think about how we've been introduced to Mr. Sir. Okay, you can write one paragraph, you can write 2. If you really want, you can write 3. So, put some sentence stems on the screen here, and I've also put on the screen some key vocabulary because we are thinking about our first impressions of a character and what the first things they do. So you can use these or you can tweak them, you can change them a little bit, but try and look at these first before you do your paragraph. Okay, so my first impression of Mr. Sir is, think of some adjectives, some words to describe what you think Mr. Sir is like. When we thought about his name, what did we think he was going to be like? Because his name makes me think he's going to be what? What sort of a person he's going to be like? When the writer first introduces him, the first thing we learn is that he, what was it? Go back through the video if you need to, okay? And if you can, pop a little quotation in. You should have those in your book. Go back and look at the ones in the little blue box in the video and use those. This creates the immediate impression that, what's he like? What is the writer trying to make us think about Mr. Sir? And if you want to, well, we've got these connectives, this is really stretching you. Can you add another piece of information on? So what else? It also wants us to think this. This is where you're really trying to move up the grades, trying to make your paragraph more developed. Okay, then that's the first thing. What else? Another thing the writer tells us. What else does it do? Can you talk about the tattoo? Can you write about him eating the sunflower seeds? Can you write about the can of soda? Can you put some of these words in? Perhaps, maybe, it could be that. Okay, so I want you to pause the video and I want you to try and write down what your first impression of Mr. Sir was. And then I'm going to show you my paragraph and you can compare yours to mine. Okay, off you go. Okay, you're right. So here is my paragraph and I've got my first impression of Mr. Sir is that he is a strict person because we don't get to know his name. It's not friendly like Mrs. Sunderland, is it? Sounds like a really strict teacher, unlike me. When the writer first introduces him, the first thing we learn is that he is sat with his feet upon the table and he didn't move. So I've put my little quotation in there. When Stanley entered the room. I don't know why I've got that there, that's a mistake. This creates the immediate impression that he's quite rude and doesn't care that Stanley is there. He probably thinks Stanley is guilty and deserves to be punished. Okay, you might have stopped there. I've written another one. Another thing the writer does to introduce Mr. Sir is to tell us that he's stopped smoking. I quit smoking last month. This makes me think Mr. Sir is going to be bad-tempered and angry with Stanley. Perhaps he might take his anger out on him and punish him more. So what I want you to check that you've got these phrases in blue, first impression, first introduces him, immediate impression, and to stretch your grades you've got some of this tentative language, perhaps, maybe, possibly. Okay, and you might have developed your writing further. You might have got a third paragraph and looked at the final bits that we looked at the end as well. Okay, so check yours, and you can always do some DIT, and you can always improve your paragraph once that you've looked at mine as well to see how yours compares to my paragraph. Okay, year 8. So well done. Well done on your hard work. I hope you've enjoyed reading the first few bits of Holes with your first week on remote learning. I hope it's gone okay. Make sure you upload your work to Teams. Your 4th lesson this week is enjoying some nice reading of your own private reading book. Check the English website. There will be some books and some links uploaded to free books on there as well in case you're stuck and you don't have as many reading books at home. Alright, get in touch with the teacher if you're stuck and make sure you keep in touch and show us all the wonderful work that you're doing at home. Okay, year 8, stay safe and look after yourselves and all your family. See you next week. Bye.